But if everything you think you know about diet and exercise, even disease, turned out to be wrong? That's what a new book called Good Calories, Bad Calories says. The author is an investigative journalist who says he's reviewed the research and interviewed over 600 experts and has the evidence to prove it. Joining us now, the author of Good Calories, Bad Calories, Gary Taubes.
Hi.
Hey, come on over. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
Okay.
I know this is a little controversial. I mean, there are a lot of doctors that don't exactly agree with some of what you're saying. And in your book, part of it is exercise. And you talk about how exercise doesn't necessarily mean losing weight or help in that regard. What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, you look at the data. First of all, you actually look at the studies, and you find that exercise, it's almost impossible to show that people who exercise lose weight. What we know is that lean people exercise more than fat people. But that doesn't mean that you could make a fat person lean by getting them to exercise. And what's been left out for the past 50 years of this debate is this simple fact that used to be sort of intuitively obvious, that if you exercise, you get hungry. Your body tries to replete the calories you've expended by making you eat more.
So what are you saying is a way that you can get lean and lose weight?
Well, what I'm saying is if you look at the biology, which for reasons we can get into have also been ignored for the past 40 years, we gain weight because our fat tissue accumulates too much fat. So you look at what regulates the fat tissue. And what regulates the fat tissue, ironically enough, is the hormone insulin. And we secrete insulin in response to the carbohydrates in our diet. And this, 40 years ago, was not controversial. This was just the way fat tissue works. You eat carbohydrates, you secrete insulin, you accumulate fat.
Because there's a lot has been written, of course, in recent years about, you know, good carbs, bad carbs, and this, that, and the other. And also in your book, and it's very tempting to be sitting out here and seeing all this food right here and which ones to go for. But also in your book, you talk about food and how it relates to disease. And part of it is heart disease. And you were saying it's not saturated fats?
I say saturated fat is probably harmless. And this is what happened.
Again, it's harmless.
It's harmless. What happened 40, 50 years ago, these 1950s, a few sort of zealous scientists got obsessed with this idea that it was cholesterol that caused heart disease and it's saturated fat that raises cholesterol levels. So the reason this other science I'm talking about got ignored is because at the same time people knew that carbohydrates make you fat, the heart disease people were saying you got to eat less fat, which means eating more carbohydrates.
Well, speaking of that, we did contact the American Heart Association, and they said some dietary fats, for example, saturated fats and trans fats, do increase the LDL, or bad cholesterol, and high LDLs have indeed been demonstrated to be associated with blood vessel diseases. The American Heart Association recommends a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol, and one that eliminates trans fat.
Yeah, and the American Heart Association, as I describe in my book, has been living in the 1970s. It's like this science developed in the 1960s. It gets to a point in the 1970s where we say LDL is related to heart disease. Let's lower LDL. Since then, there's been 30 years more science.
I know you want to give us some examples of what you're talking about.
Well, this is the ideal healthy diet.
Sure,
Healthy
oatmeal.
Breakfast by the American Heart Association.
Right.
Oatmeal, strawberries, there's no fat. You add low-fat milk or no-fat milk, you've got the ideal. You know, the problem is this diet will raise your insulin levels. And if you raise your insulin levels, you'll store more calories as fat. This is supposed to kill us, okay? Because it's got the eggs,
fried
and
eggs,
the yolk, and the bacon, and it's got saturated fat, and it's got cholesterol in it. That's supposed to raise our cholesterol. I'd actually move the orange juice over here
with the
American Heart Association. Like I said, the problem is, though, if you look at the data today, which I did, this is also not controversial. People today believe that it's not the cholesterol in the LDL that causes heart disease, it's the size and density of this LDL particle. Smaller and denser it is, the more dangerous
You're really challenging conventional thinking, because there's so many doctors and so many people who have, and you reviewed a lot of, you didn't do any of your own
I don't do my own research. I read
the
medical literature for the past 150 years in every field, not just, these experts. If you're a cardiologist, you learn about heart disease, and you read cardiology journals and maybe the New England Journal of Medicine. If you're an exercise physiologist, you learn about exercise, and you read your exercise physiology journals. I got to read them all. I get to, and nowadays you can do that.
Come on, the bacon cheeseburger?
I know, this is what...
The bacon cheeseburger?
35 years ago, when Robert Atkins wrote Dr. Atkins' Diet Revolution, he said you can eat this and be healthy because this won't raise insulin levels. So it won't make you get fat. And the American Medical Association came down on him like a ton of bricks because you can't tell people you can eat. Right. And this is the sort of sea change I'm describing. Nowadays, heart disease is supposed to be about insulin.